Hey folks, so the next question that I'm going to be answering for you is what is the most common problem, excuse me, tax related problem that you see amongst real estate agents specifically? Like people ask about, different things, but agents all ask me the same question. So the answer to that is something that I write about in a lot of my emails. It's going through an endless cycle of tax debt. Now, let me flesh that out for you. So, what ends up happening is you'll go your first year, you do a couple of closings, you'll get a 1099 from your broker, and then when it's time to file your tax return, you'll file an extension. And then what happens is sometime around October 15th, you'll do your filing and then you'll pay the tax bill. Now, that's assuming you have the cash to pay for it. You probably do by then, hopefully. But what happens then is this cycle will continue for years. Now, the second year comes around, they have a higher tax liability. Usually they can't pay it all by the time they actually go to file the return, which most of the time is going to be later in the year. So it creates a cycle where they're paying the tax bill from last year using income they received this year, and that income they received this year is also subject to tax. So that's where the cycle really starts, is when you're paying last year's tax bill with this year's income. And that'll just get worse and worse as years go on. Usually it'll start there, and then a couple of years later, just the emotional reality of confronting the situation becomes too much, and then people just stop filing altogether. So now, not only are they in tax debt from the previous years, but they haven't filed, which means they're accumulating penalties and interest, and they're not catching up with the bill. So they're continuing to pay old tax bills with new income, and the cycle just goes and goes and goes, and it builds and builds and builds and builds until finally people get burnt out. 5-6 years into this cycle, maybe you haven't filed in 2 years and you're still trying to pay off a payment plan from 2 tax years ago. It becomes too much for a lot of people to deal with, and this is something that drives a lot of agents and just a lot of contractors in general out of business. When you're used to getting a W-2, you're just not prepared for the reality of the 1099, and a few years in, when you're doing well, it's just overwhelming to have to deal with the amount of tax debt that you do. So that's the most common problem, is people falling into the cycle of tax debt. And the way the cycle really starts is when you're paying last year's tax bill with this year's income that you have not accounted for the tax liability on yet. So I hope this answers the question. That's the most common problem I run into. Obviously I run into lots of others, and back tax returns is kind of its own thing, but I feel like that tax debt cycle that I just described is really the thing that's just a killer for a lot of people in the industry. So hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll probably do one more of these videos before the weekend's over, so I'll catch you guys soon.